Hi and welcome to Cambridge University. Now, just in case you're wondering, this isn't University Challenge, it is 2 wheels better, and we're here to meet Dr. Roderick Woods. He's the man behind the Cambridge standard, and he's the one who's been looking after us as far as standards go for leather clothing and other sorts of clothing. So come with me and all will be revealed.
Well, the Cambridge standard is a document produced so that you can actually evaluate garments by testing them in the laboratory to see if they should give some protection in the case of an accident on the road. The document is a private document. It's not a European standard.
Now, the ordinary guy in the street, he'd feel this piece of leather like I'm doing now and think, oh, that's nice, feels nice and soft, the stitching's there and all the rest of it. How is he going to assess whether leathers are any good or not, irrespective of CE marking? Is that one of the major problems?
Yes, leather is a problem, and in fact, by picking it up and feeling it like this, I don't think the ordinary man in the street can actually tell anything. I can tell something, but I've been doing it for years. The only way you can do it is to take a scalpel, do that to it, and then try and tear it.
You wouldn't recommend doing this in the shop, though, would you?
Well, not while the owner's watching, anyway, especially if it does this.
Good
And
God.
And the
Struth.
stitching with it. Now that felt nice and soft and very similar, but that is dangerously weak, and this is magnificently strong.
Why have you done this job of destroying these thousands of pounds worth of leathers? You've got 15 suits here, I understand.
Yes, I think we started with 15 suits. If I was actually going to do CE testing, then I would require more than one example of each suit, and we would test each seam design, taking 5 samples out and testing all 5 samples and obtaining the mean value. With the leather, I would take 6 samples and test it in different directions. And so we would actually look at every single feature of the suit to check there are no weak points. The suit is only as good as its weakest point, so there shouldn't be any. So on these suits, just for a quick test, I've taken single samples and subjected them to my normal test.
Right, this is the time for the impact test. Looks a very impressive bit of kit. So how does this equate to the rider hitting the road?
Well, in fact, it absolutely doesn't, because what we have here is an infinite mass anvil. There's 8 tons of concrete in the floor, and there's a ton of concrete here, and the steel anvil, which represents the knee or the shoulder here, does not move when it's hit. And then we hit it with a small mass, 5 kilograms. So that's the road, this is you. No, it doesn't equate. But what the test does do is it looks at the way the energy in the impactor is translated into a force in you. And in fact, it's the force in you that determines whether the bones break or the bones don't break.
Okay, so what do we do? This piece of leather here, this has got the CE foam in already, and you're going to test it as a sort of a composite unit, leather and foam.
Right, I like to determine the protective value of the whole garment, not just of single materials. So I would rather test the whole knee region, the whole shin region, which is what I've got here. That is then placed on the anvil, and the material is struck. And I'll just tap this, and you'll see that you can get a force reading in the anvil on the oscilloscope screen over there. If I just tap it with my hand, you can see the force. That's now 5 kilos lifted to 1 meter, which is 50 joules. A rider at 60 miles an hour has something like 60,000 joules within them when they're flying through the air. As I said, this does not in any sense replicate the road accident. Now I'm going to drop it. Right, this axis along here is time, and each square is 1 millisecond. This axis here is the force, and each square is 8 kilonewtons. So this is about 24 kilonewtons. And we think that in this sort of experiment, the practical force limit should be 35. So that's a pass at 50 joules impact. And the whole event is lasting about 2.5 milliseconds, which is fair to middling. If that could last 6 milliseconds, then the force would only be about 8 kilonewtons. So time is extremely important.
So Roderick, what's this contraption here? Looks a highly engineered piece of kit.
Right, well, this rather heavy-looking piece of steel is the burst test apparatus, and this is for testing the strength of seams by applying a pressure underneath them until they rupture.
And how do you actually apply the pressure then? If it's not a silly question.
It could be air, it could be water, it could be oil. In this case it's water and it's pumped up under this membrane. The sample is put in like that, and then the membrane is underneath. Then the sample is clamped with these blocks, and by having separate pieces one can adjust each one individually so that however complex the sample, it can still be clamped.
It's a very neat piece of kit. Is that something you designed, or did you actually make it?
No, this piece I designed, but I had to have it made because it's quite subtle how you cut that steel. Then the lid goes on, and then I shall screw the whole thing together. That's now clamped. That will not slip. So I now pump water in underneath and watch the pressure. And if you watch the centre, you'll see it gradually bulging up. The pressure is on the gauge down there. So 50 psi, that's very low.
I think it's about to go. Whee!
90.
It's a good job the water didn't come out there.
It sometimes does.
Yeah, I was to say,
Oh, yes.
does a membrane ever burst?
Oh yes, about every 20th one it bursts. Then the water's let out, then I take it apart, and from the figure on the gauge, then I can work out the bursting strength of the sample. And in this case, that was the leather that actually burst, not the seam. A weak piece of leather, no doubt.
We're now at the abrasion test area. Very cramped compartment that you work in here.
Well, the machine's nearly as big as the room, and the machine needs to have a room to itself, so there's not much room for me. But that's all right. Normally I'm alone. I don't have all these guests and visitors and people.
All right, all right. So what are you actually going to do then, in essence? You got a piece of leather, that's one that's been through the test?
Yes, this piece has been tested, and you can see I've ground a hole through it. I measure the time it takes to make that hole. So I take a fresh sample, and I braid it in the middle and measure the time it takes. So there's now a very fine copper wire in front of the piece of leather and underneath. And the timer will time the time it takes for the first, then the second to be cut through. So I'll now set it up to actually do that. Well, that's very good. For a single leather, 4 seconds is sufficient to withstand a normal high-speed impact. So I would say for a high-performance suit, suitable for a racer, that's the sort of leather to use.
Well, we've been in luck today because a lot of the leathers that you've seen being tested are in fact part of a product test by Motorcycle News. And I've got with me Terry Snelling from Motorcycle News, who's been witnessing these tests, and they're going to do a full article in a couple of weeks' time. Terry, impressive tests, I think, don't you?
A real eye-opener, Jeff. Yes, we were expecting to find some differences between the suits, obviously, but I don't think we were expecting such radical differences. I mean, some suits were really very poor, surprisingly bad, and other suits were absolutely excellent. It seemed there was, in fact, very little middle ground.
I know, you could almost, I think it's true to say it's actually frightening when you see some of these close-up, because to the likes of you and me, they looked, first off, excellent, didn't they? All looked the same. But when Dr. Woods started peeling back some of the bits, I mean, it is frightening, isn't it? You think, it's true, that could have been me.
That's quite right, and as you said earlier, the customer going into a leathers showroom at his local dealer, he can feel the leather, he can smell it, and
which I hasten to say, these are good ones, and these are CE approved.
that's right, but there's no way of telling the true quality.
Roderick, we've had a good look round, some startling results, I think, from all the leathers that we've seen today. But tell me, is price any indication at all of what you can get?
Well, I don't think you ever get a good suit for £200. It just isn't possible to make something like that. But some of the suits are very expensive, £1,000 and more, and some of those are not very protective. But some of them are wonderful. And perhaps 650s, 750 will get you a good suit. You can't tell. That's the trouble. You can't tell by feeling it. You can't tell by looking at it.
There is an alternative to leather, a material that's strong yet breathes, a suit that's been designed, made and tested that might just take us into the 21st century.
Well, Jeff, this is the McBean Tritek Suit. as you can see, if Andy can just turn around for us. This one is up as a police suit. It comes in two distinctive layering systems. The outer being, as this one is here, a high conspicuity outer, which is a waterproof and breathable fabric. If we open this up a little bit, if we can just get in there, what you will see then is the under fabric, which is the mainstay of the Tritek system. It's a terry loop Kevlar fabric, which is very, very abrasion resistant. Within the construction of the inner suit, at the elbow areas, shoulder areas, hips, knees, we've got the high density rubber Norstress fabric, which is for the impact protection.
And this Norstress, I've heard of that before. This is the stuff that is CE approved in itself, isn't it? And
Yeah.
It's sewn into leather
It
suits
is,
and all the
it
rest
is,
of it. Yeah.
I mean, this whole suit is CE approved to the Cambridge motorcycle standard.
Yeah.
Yeah, this particular one's been out on trial with a police force. We've over the past year we've had 20 police forces trialling this outfit for us. The whole thing is the knitted Kevlar, all bound together by a high density binding to keep the thing secure.
And this is all this trick stitching you've got as well, and there's so many stitches per inch and
That's
all
the
rest
one,
of
yeah.
it.
Yeah, it's got to be precise to keep the thing integral.
And these side straps, the adjustment again, it's important to have it snug fitting.
It's got to be a perfect fit, really, for the rider to be comfortable, especially if it's a policeman or an ambulance paramedic who may be wearing it all day and maybe on and off the bike quite often. It feels, as a wearer, quite like a leather suit. It feels quite heavy to hold it like that. Once you've got the garment on, it becomes a lot easier to use. And the feedback that we've had mainly from the police forces that have been wearing this thing, it beds in far more quickly than the leathers do.
Yeah,
Plus, it is a washable and breathable item. Development has taken approximately 10 years with the help of the Cambridge motorcycle protection team down there. We've been trialling it with police forces over the last year or so. We've had reasonable success supplying those up to the present time. The next market that we'll be attacking, as you can see from that, is the ambulance paramedics, of which you will see more and more on motorcycles over the next 4 or 5 years.
Yes, yeah.
Well, with the outers that you've seen, which are the waterproof outers to the high visibility standards, the lightweights and the air permeable trousers, you also get waterproof over trousers at high visibility. You're looking in the region of about £1,000 per system.
Well, that's a snapshot of the protective clothing scene, but what about the retailer's point of view? And who better to ask than our very own Wayne Kershaw of On Your Bike in Manchester. Wayne, this protective clothing business and the CE marking, as you well know, in July of last year it became law, but there's still leathers on the market that aren't designed to be protective, or they're not sold as being protective. Does this present you with any sort of problems with the
Not really, Jeff, to be honest with you. Bearing in mind both leathers and material gear is in theory supposed to be sold as protective garments with the modern materials such as corduroys and so on and Kevlar. And in the leathers, they're as they were. They haven't changed very much. Either the industry's decided not to pursue the CE directive or the customer has not chosen to demand it. We've found that people don't ask for it. They come in, they know of it, they come in and they say, what have you got to suit? And we kit them out. We never suggest that it's going to, save their ass, if you want. It's protective gear, maybe not CE approved. Or you could back it up with CE approval armour inside it, as you pointed out with Dr. Woods. But it doesn't pose us a problem, and we haven't got a lot of items on the shelves that are strictly CE approved. I think if they appraise the product sensibly and use their own intelligence and a bit of guidance maybe from the dealer they're talking to, I think they'll realise the fact that if a product's been on the market for a number of years and it's Mark III version maybe, but it's as it was protective a number of years ago. People don't fall off much differently to what they used to. Things are very much the same. Bikes do go very, very quick nowadays, but there's a limit to where you can go so quick. Misfortunes are very, very similar, and the garments are very similar to what they were. They were good enough before, so I think they're probably good enough now. But I'm not opposed to things getting better. Safety first.
To me, one thing that Dr. Woods was doing, he was actually nicking the leather and pulling it apart, and I said to him, well, you can't do that in the shop. He said, well, you could do, you could try, but you wouldn't be recommending that.
Well, we'll let everybody do so, and then we'll just send the bill to Dr. Wood.